For the January block, we're going to do the heart applique. The first method I'm going to show you is fusing, which is very simple and it will take you no time at all. You're first going to select your fabrics, and usually I do light with darks on the top, but I'm going to switch it and do a dark background with the lights on the top. Now the dark background, I'm going to cut it at 13 inches even though we need a 12.5 inch unfinished square. Sometimes, depending upon the method you are using for your applique, it will shrink in size. So I'm cutting it 13 inches, but notice I'm marking it at the 12-inch line, so I make sure all of my pieces fit within the 12 inches. Then I've selected all of my other fabrics to go on top. Place your Wonder Under on top of your pattern and trace, or make a separate pattern and then trace around that to give you your shape. To alleviate some of the stiffness that goes along with a fused piece, cut out the center of your Wonder Under before fusing it onto your fabric, and that will help. You're going to want to press according to the manufacturer's directions onto the wrong side for about 5 seconds. Notice you do not cut out along the line until after your pieces are pressed onto your fabric. Rather than trying to peel off your paper from the edge, take a pin, make a slit, and then it's very easy to peel off your paper. It's much less frustrating to try to do it like that. So once all of your pieces are completely cooled, then you may remove your paper. You have all your pieces placed now. You could press them in place at this point, or I think I'm going to do it one at a time and then do decorative stitches around each of my pieces to cover up the raw edges. So it is your choice. I started with the bottom layer, did the decorative stitch, and you can see why we cut a 13-inch square rather than a 12.5-inch square to start with, because it does shrink it up a little bit when you're doing a decorative stitch. Now we add the large heart. You could either place your hearts right to the center, or you could place them where you see more of the stem underneath. I think I will do mine where I see a bit more stem underneath since I have done the decorative stitching. It's your choice. Now that you're finished, you're going to trim to 12.5 inches. That is your unfinished size. You have one more option. You could add little corner pieces if you would like. Here is the finished block with the added corner triangles. That is your choice if you would like to add those. Now I'm going to show you how to do a turned edge applique. I'm now going to show you a freezer paper applique method. It is the method used by Kim Deal. She was a speaker at the Guild one year and I took her class. I thought it was a very good technique for applique because before that time I didn't really enjoy applique. And this way I do. I don't like doing hand applique. This is machine. You want to trace your pieces onto freezer paper. If it is a large piece, I like to actually double that by just putting the shiny side onto the matte side and pressing it. Once you have your double layer, then you're going to cut it out directly on the edge, which is different than the way we do the fusible. The fusible you cut after you put on your fabric. For the smaller pieces, I just keep them single layer, but it's up to you. If you'd like to try it with a double layer, if you're a beginner at this process, that's fine too. Okay, on this method, the shiny side is up of the freezer paper. Generally, when you're doing a hand applique, you put the shiny side down on the fabric, iron it, and then use starch to go over the edge. This is different. This is the shiny side up. To get it to stay in place, we put a tiny dab of glue, just a tiny dab. just to keep it in place. Then you're going to take your little mini iron, if you have one. If not, of course, you can use your big iron, but these are very handy. Just to bring your 1/4 inch seam around and attach it to the shiny side of the freezer paper. Wait to make your clip until you come up to the edge so that it doesn't shift on you. And you make your clip, just bring all that around and go all the way around with your edges. When you do this little piece, you want to clip the curve and have a very small seam allowance so you will have enough room to turn this. You do not need to turn the top part because it will go underneath the small heart. The technique I use for applique is by Kim Deal. This piece, however, makes it very difficult because it's too tiny. So my recommendation with this little piece is to spray it with some starch. Let it dry completely and then peel it off from your freezer paper. Press it again in place and then either stitch it, or you could still zigzag it the same method I use from Kim Deal, but since it is so tiny it does tend to stretch out of shape a little bit. So you may feel better about hand stitching it. I don't like hand stitching for applique, so that's why I always do the zigzagging method.
Yeah.
Decide where you want your pieces to go, but only press one at a time. The freezer paper will keep it in place, but I do like to add a little bit of glue just to make sure it stays in place while I'm sewing it. If you press all of them at one time, they tend to shift. So just do one at a time as long as you have made your placement. When doing the stitching, you want to have more tension on the bottom. If you have a Bernina, there's a hole here in the bobbin case, and you can thread your bobbin thread through that hole. Lower your tension on your upper tension. Have your stitch width a little less than 1, your stitch length a little less than 1, and then you're going to use invisible thread on the top, not on the bottom. On the bottom you just use regular thread. Bring your thread, your bobbin thread up. One stitch will go off of your pattern piece, one stitch will go on, and you're going to zigzag all the way around with that. We're going to be sewing over top of where we started. Clip off your threads and then just continue. And just sew over top of what you had already started. Now, your freezer paper is still in here, so it makes it nice and stiff and easy to sew on the machine. That's why we keep that in there. Now I'll show you how to remove it. You make a little clip in the back and then cut it to a 1/4 inch approximately seam allowance. Now this is still sticking to the freezer paper, so you'll have to pull it up a little bit from the freezer paper. Obviously save that piece, we can use that somewhere else. Now you have your freezer paper in there. You hold your fabric, give it a little tug, give it a little tug, and it comes right out. And that's how you take out your freezer paper. You might if you have a little bit left over in your point, you might have to get a tweezers and pull that out. This one came out just fine, but sometimes you have a little point left over and you'll just have to use a tweezer. And that's it. For every new layer, you trim the back out, and it's nice because then you don't have all that bulk as if you were to do an applique and just layer one on top of the other. When you're trimming out the back, make sure you don't trim the wrong part, because it would be easy to trim out the purple heart when you need to trim the interior orange heart in this case. And then what's nice also on the center, you cut out the center when you have your little circle in place, and you get rid of all that bulk. It makes for a much nicer center, and then you just remove the paper and you're all set. At this point, you decide if you want to add your corner triangles or leave it as is. Trim your block to 12.5 inches before adding your corner triangles.